Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Welcome back. Now, we're all still processing the shock and the anger of finding out about the post office scandal, where the victims were just these everyday, ordinary people who, through no fault of their own, were accused of wrongdoing, faced bills of thousands of pounds, and were really bullied by lawyers, and it was a very frightening experience. Well, now there's a new scandal which has parallels to the post office, except this time it involves HMRC, and this really should be on our horizon. It's called the loan charge scandal. Now, the loan charge was introduced into legislation in 2016, coming into effect in 2019, and it was designed to retrospectively tax people for all remuneration in the form of these loans over the last 20 years. Now, those affected were hit with a huge bill. And this is despite the fact that they did declare these loans and all the money on their tax returns at the time, and they were told by accountants, tax advisors, and indeed sometimes their employers that these schemes were legitimate and that they were all compliant with the law. Now, this controversial tax avoidance clampdown has affected an estimated 60,000 people. It's caused huge trauma to people because the amounts of money that's been asked back from HMRC are absolutely huge, and it's actually linked to 10 suicides. Now, all of this is sounding tragically familiar, and many of you might be thinking this is something the ITV drama department wants to have a look at. Well, to explain what's going on, I'm joined by Blanche Zaff. Now, Blanche has had her own personal experience of this, and she's also a spokesperson for the Loan Charge Action Group. Blanche, thank you so much for being with us in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
So just tell us about your story, Blanche, and what happened to you.
I think what happens to me has actually happened to everybody. You've got PAYE, you've got self-employed, and then you've got contractors. And there's been a lot in the news recently about IR35, very famous people, Lorraine Kelly, Robert Glenister, Eamon Holmes, Kay Adams, to mention a few. And everybody who's working as a contractor doesn't want those issues. So they've gone to their tax accountants and said, we need to be compliant with IR35. How do we do this? And the tax specialists have said, right, you need to be in this scheme. Everybody has been conscientious and said, is it QC approved? Is it compliant with HMRC? Is it legal? And all the answers were yes. And if you go to a tax professional, you accept their advice. They've submitted their annual returns every single year. And then all of a sudden, they weren't told, they found out they were subject to this thing called the loan charge. And it wasn't as though HMRC said, we're a little bit unhappy with the way that you're paying your taxes over the past year or 2 years or even 5 years. In some instances, they've gone back 20 years. Now, I would like to say that everybody who was in an arrangement did pay their tax advisors between 15 and 20%, and that was supposed to cover their services, their NI and their tax. As far as they were concerned, those amounts went through to the destinations of where they should be received. Unfortunately, many companies who operated these umbrella schemes didn't forward that money on. And HMRC missed the boat. So instead of going to the originators, the employers, they came back to the employees, the low-hanging fruit.
The little people.
The little people. And they not only said, you owe this money up to 20 years, but we're going to take away your right to have any appeal in court whatsoever. And it gets even worse than that. I remember watching the post office scandal, my jaw was dropping. And you think, if this was fiction, you'd say, nah, it's gone a little bit too far. But here we are, 2024. HMRC can say you owe money going back to 2012. You've just found out they will charge you interest going back to whatever date that was.
So what kind of sums are people looking at?
Horrendous, unaffordable. And people in these schemes weren't high flyers. There were workers in a hospital, canteen, cleaners, right up to doctors. And then you've got all spectrums. So it doesn't matter if they're earning low wages or high wages.
And just to ask a really basic, sort of stupid question here, Blanche, and this is something my listeners might be thinking. So if somebody, I'm reading something here about a social worker, care worker. She said, I faced the prospect of losing my house or being made bankrupt through no fault of my own. I had no idea when I joined an umbrella company that I was doing anything later that would be deemed less than honest later. Why were people like this social care worker or cleaners being forced to join an umbrella group? Who was telling them to do that?
First of all, tax advisors, but very simply, if you take the NHS, totally reputable, they went through a phase of only employing people through umbrella schemes. So
is this like outsourcing?
Yeah.
Right.
So I've seen the actual documentation, and it makes sense. If you've got locums working at all different hospitals, all different locations within the UK, if an umbrella company says, now look, we'll take care of all the employee benefits, so you've just got to pay the wages, it makes financial sense for the NHS who's struggling. Everybody would agree with that. And the NHS would say, yes, we'd like to employ you. Here is a list of approved umbrella schemes. You say which one you'd like to go with, and we'll process your employment details. Now, I think I mentioned earlier that many of the scheme providers didn't forward the monies, and it's been very tragic. We've had 10 suicides admitted to, probably more. There have been unsuccessful suicides, about 14, and quite a number of self-harm. Now, in the news recently, there's been certain providers, and one of the companies that has been mentioned is AML, and 2 of the 10 suicides had signed up to AML.
Right. So this is something which, and just for the avoidance of doubt, there is an element, some people have heard that this is sort of about tax avoidance, but it's not about sort of tax avoidance. It's not about people trying to dodge their tax, is it? I think that's quite important, just to explain that.
Well, if you look at the personalities who got caught up in IR35, they would lose their reputation and their income if they did anything dodgy. These are honest people. Well, okay, let's take my partner. He's been PAYE all of his life. He was going through a very painful divorce. His children were young, and he wanted to spend time with them. The only way to do that was to become a contractor, work a few days, a few hours. So for the first time in his life, he had to consider IR35, which he knew nothing about. So he went to a reputable firm of accountants, tax advisors. How do I do this? I don't think anybody was tax dodgers. You can't be a tax dodger if you seek advice.
And of course, as you say, a lot of people, like, for example, this case study I'm reading about a social care worker, you've talked about like cleaners and catering staff and things like that. You know, the idea that they're doing tax avoidance when actually they're just being told by their employer, pick one of these umbrella companies. So people didn't know any better. So, I mean, it looks like it's causing so much pain. I know that this has been beginning to be raised in Parliament now. Sarah Brickcliffe MP said this in a parliamentary debate in the 18th of January. These are ordinary workers. These are our constituents. They're not fat cats. They haven't got offshore bank accounts. These are ordinary members of the public who desperately need our help. We should be going after the disputed tax from those who promoted and operated the schemes and who made huge amounts of money doing so. We should be protecting ordinary workers from abuses of power and pursuing those opaque and moneyed bodies that sought to game the system. I presume you would agree with everything she said.
I not only agree, I was there in the public gallery. I listened to 28 MPs, plus Owen Jones, all representing their constituents, many with pieces of paper with victims' summaries. And what can you do? You go to your MP. An MP's job is to represent their constituent. There is a loan charge and taxpayer fare, APPG. There are 257 members, one of the largest APPGs ever. which roughly represents about 40% of Parliament. So all of these parliamentarians are saying, this isn't right, do the same thing. And what happens is whoever is Secretary to the Treasury stands up at the dispatch box and spouts a particular narrative which hasn't changed since the law came in.
So what do you want to see happen? What's the answer to this? What are you asking for?
Well, first of all, it's retrospective. How can you have any taxpayer assurance, any rule of law, if somebody can put a retrospective law in place that you're unaware of? And none of this is illegal. It's not even deemed illegal today. So as they agreed in this debate, the first thing they should do is remove any retrospective element of the loan charge and future laws. Now, taking the post office scandal into account, and I feel so sorry because there were obviously 900 people with criminal records, and many of them don't want to relive that. And as with the loan charge, many people are just too damaged, frightened,
mentally ground down,
totally to do anything. And an independent review. The last review, and I actually attended 2 meetings with Lord Morse, wasn't independent of HMRC. It was highly restricted. So let's have a proper review, totally independent. And I listened to Sir Desmond. I nearly got thrown out because I was applauding in the public gallery. And he said, as with the post office scandal, MPs shouldn't just accept laws that are passed and not scrutinised. They should all scrutinise everything that goes through, give taxpayers assurance of what they're doing.
Because, I mean, do you feel that this has parallels with the IT Horizon scandal at the post office?
In as much it's the little person against the government, yes. With the post office, they didn't have the benefit of social media. We do. And with MPs standing up with all the social media, and obviously HMRC have their own as well, they can no longer peddle the same propaganda. MPs are getting smart to this. And they can't ignore any legal process or time limits or make up their own rules.
Now, Rachel Reeves has suggested that she would review the loan charge if there's if they win a general election. Do you welcome that, or do you want more from the Labour Party?
Oh, that would be just an amazing start, and I think they're all in tune with that.
And have there been any settlements around this? What's happening with people? Are people paying this, or are people doing what Alan Bates and others did and resisting it? Are people getting prosecuted? Just give us a flavour of that.
I don't know all the answers. People are doing the best they can. The worst is HMRC don't write to you and say, we think you owe us X amount of money, and you write back and say, oh, really? Can we negotiate this? They just write and say, you owe this sum of money. Very often it's queried. Always the sum is revised upwards. But not only that, they charge interest on it, and it's all, you can't negotiate anything with them at all. And also with contractors, they don't have employee benefits like pension, holiday, sick pay. And to settle these unaffordable amounts, so obviously there are people who are taking their lives, people have become bankrupt, they've watched all their...
Probably taking out big loans as well to pay, or borrowing money from family and friends.
Yes, and they're losing their homes, marriage breakups. And I'll tell you what's incredible. Through freedom of information, that's been so difficult to get hold of, lots and lots of barriers. Even HMRC employed people through umbrella schemes.
Wow, gosh, oh, the irony. Well, look, we're just coming to the end of our time, Blanche. If anyone's listening to this and they are affected by this, how can they get in contact with your campaign? Because this campaign group is trying to bring people together across the country. I mean, again, it's sort of analogous with the Mr. Bates situation. If anyone's listening and they want some more information, they might want to get in contact. This story, they might be going through what you've just described. How can they get in contact?
Well, first of all, they're not alone. We're all in the same boat, and we support each other. So the best thing to do is to contact the Loan Charge Action Group, and their email address is contact@hmrcloancharge.info. And we'll be very, very pleased to hear from anyone and give support to anybody who needs it.
Because I imagine this must be a very frightening thing to go through, and you must feel very isolated. There's a sense of shame that you might have done something wrong. It's quite isolating, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sense of shame, sense of guilt. And also a lot of people don't share with their family, their friends. They live in a horrendous cell of guilt.
Well, look, Blanche, thank you so much for coming in. I think this is a scandal which is going to get more traction. I think it's definitely starting to cut through in Parliament because, as you say, more and more MPs are talking about this, and it's something that I think hopefully some action will be taken on. But it must be incredibly frightening for people to get these huge bills from HMRC and feel completely sort of confused and lost about why. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you too. Thank you.